Welcome to the presentation of a lecture from Gnostic Radio, a free public service from the Gnostic tradition of Samael Aun Weor. Gnosis is the root wisdom of all the world's great religions. Gnosis is a universal teaching of practical science, whose goal is absolute liberation from suffering and the complete development of the human being. This lecture is one of many available by free download or podcast. The hundreds of hours of lectures range in topic and complexity in order to address the many needs of humanity. Each Saturday, Gnostic Radio broadcasts live. The live lecture is accompanied by an online chat, allowing listeners to read additional explanations related to the lecture and providing an opportunity to ask questions of the speaker. To learn how to participate or tune into our continuous web broadcast, visit our website for more information at gnosticradio.org. Gnostic Radio is made possible by the financial support of listeners like you. For more information or to make a donation, visit our website at gnosticradio.org. Now, with heartfelt wishes for the end of suffering for all creatures, we begin the lecture. May all beings be happy. The letter Nun is the 14th letter of the Hebrew alphabet. The 13th letter we discussed was Mem, and it relates to water. The Nun represents a fish. There's a very close relationship between the letters Mem and Nun. They are always dependent upon one another, in relation with one another, close together. This makes it easy for us to remember the characteristics of Mem and Nun when we think about them in this way. That the fish needs water to be alive, to survive, to exist. Likewise, the letter Nun needs the letter Mem. The letter Nun depends upon Mem. It requires Mem. We see this in many instances, many cases. For example, in the manna. You might remember that when the nation of Israel was in the wilderness for 40 years, this relates with Mem, which stands for 40. And God sustained them by providing them the manna. And this word manna is usually translated as a bread of wisdom, a type of food. But that food came down from Shamayim with the dew, with moisture. And manna is spelled Mem Nun. Mem is water. That is the dew from heaven. And the Nun relates to a fish, symbolizes a fish. But it is much more than that. So the manna is that sustenance that the initiates receive from God when they're passing through their trials and ordeals. We need that mana in order to survive our wilderness. It isn't just the water, the mem, it is what's in it that we need. It is the nun. And that nun is life. It is a type of primordial wisdom within the water. The character nun has two forms. The primary nun looks somewhat like a bet or a kaf or a resh. Not a resh, a kaf or a bet that has been shortened. And the final nun, which is used at the end of a word, looks like an extended vav. And there are relationships between all of these letters. The final nun is related to vav. The primary or first nun is related with bet. It is related with kaf. But primarily, most importantly, the nun depends on mem. It is the 14th letter, and so represents the number 14. But as a value, it also represents the number 50. Mem is 40, nun is 50. The image of the nun is said to derive from an ancient hieroglyph of a serpent from the Egyptians, which that old hieroglyph actually looks more like a lamed to my eye. But nonetheless, the nun is related with the serpent. The word in Hebrew for serpent is nahash, which starts with nun. And as you know, the serpent is a pivotal symbol in all religions, but especially Judeo-Christian. It's unfortunate that so many followers of religions avoid the serpent, are afraid of the serpent, and consider any appearance of a serpent to be evil. This is not religion, this is fanaticism. True religion is the knowledge that unites us to God. And the pivotal force that allows this to happen is nun, the first letter of the word for serpent. This is important. Nahash means serpent. So when you read in the scriptures about the serpent, you're reading about Nahash. Almost in every case. But sometimes, where in English the Bible says serpent, it doesn't say that in Hebrew. There are other words that you need to know. This is why the Hebrew letters are so important for us to study. The word nun, of course in English we always associate that with a nun, a female renunciate. And there is a relationship. But primarily, the word nun in Hebrew, in addition to relating to this letter, it also is a verb. And you'll be surprised to know that it means to become degenerated. To become degenerated. Nun. This is very surprising. Because a little bit later on in the Bible, towards the end of the story of Moses, we hear about Yeshua, who in English we call Joshua, who took control after Moses. And yet, Yeshua is the son of Nun. It says in the Bible. The son of Nun. So how can Yeshua, which is just another name for Jesus, be the son of Nun? If the literal word Nun means to become degenerated. This is a very curious fact in the Scripture. And it merits our investigation. This letter Nun hides a great depth of mysteries. As I mentioned, it's the first letter of the word Nahash. It is also the first letter of many words that relate to water, such as flood or river. The Hebrew word for flood is Nahal, and for river is Nahar. Now, both of these come out of the waters, right? The flood comes from the Mem. The river comes from the Mem. But the flood and the river both start with Nun. And you remember, in the time of Noah, which begins with Nun, the flood came to destroy all the degenerated ones, those who were under the power of Nun. Right? Interesting. But Nun is everywhere in this. Yet, when we want to return to God, when we want to receive the blessings from above, and to drink of the waters of life, we need to drink from that fountain which springs in our belly. And the word for fountain also begins with Nun. And that river of life that flows from our belly begins with Nun. That river of life is within us, energetically, spiritually, even physically. It is our sexual waters. Not just the water, not just the substance of it, the matter or the mem, but what is in it. What is in our water is Nun. Not a literal fish, a physical fish, but the force of life. Nun. And how do we know this is so? Because in our waters is the power to create Nefesh Haya. Nefesh is another Hebrew word that begins with Nun. Nefesh refers to what's called the animal soul. It is the primordial soul that we have. The nefesh is related with our blood. It is that aspect of soul that God places into existence in order for it to develop itself. And every living thing has nefesh. That nefesh, the raw animal soul, came out of the mem, the waters of sex. But for that sexual act to create, there had to be a combination of nun, the sperm and ovum. The nun of a male and a female. And through that union, that combination, a new life emerges, which is nefesh, the animal soul. That nefesh must be purified, must be enlivened with haya, life. And to do that requires sanctity, sacrifice, chastity. Three factors: birth, death, and sacrifice. This is, of course, the basic point of religion: to teach the nefesh how to become nefesh haya. To teach the soul to become a living soul. As we are now, we are dead. Dead to the Spirit. Dead to God. We don't see God. We don't know God. Most of us are curious, but don't have experience of God. We are not nefesh haya. A nefesh haya is a living soul. A soul that perceives the divine. A soul that has life, that is enlivened by the power of Nun. In the Bible, in Genesis, or Bereshit, we study the creation, the genesis of life. And this alchemical book explains to us how to create the nefesh haya, how to become a living soul. In other words, how our own Elohim, our own Jehovah, creates in us through the power of the waters. And this book is symbolic, especially the first chapter that explains the days of Genesis, the days of creation. Those days are symbolic. They are about you. They have some representation in relation with the ancient past, but we don't care about that right now. The ancient past is gone. What we have before us now is a terrible question: to be or not to be. As we are now, we are dead. We don't have life. We suffer. We need to be redeemed. We need to be saved. We need salvation, but from ourselves. We need to be saved from ourselves. We need Nun for that. We need that letter, the mystery of the letter Nun. In the chapters, or the section of Genesis about the days of Genesis, the days of creation, verse 21 in the first book, it says, in English, "And God created the great whales." That's not what it says in Hebrew. In Hebrew it says, "And God created great tanin." Now this word tanin, nobody can agree what it means. The Jews, the rabbis, the priests, none of them can agree. In Hebrew, it is spelled Tav, Nun, Yod, Nun. Very important word, tanin. Tav, Nun, Yod, Nun. Both nuns are there, as well as a letter Tav and a letter Yod. We've discussed the Yod at length. The Tav is the 22nd letter. It is the final letter of the Hebrew alphabet. It is the synthesis of everything. It is the seal, the covenant, the fulfillment, the completion. The Tav represents it is finished. It is accomplished. It is done. This word tanin, therefore, contains Nun and the seal, the completion, the fulfillment. So in this chapter of Genesis it says, "And God created great tanin." Now some read this, and because no one's exactly sure what tanin is supposed to mean, they base their assumptions on literal readings of the Bible. And they look for the other occurrences of this word tanin. And they compare with theories and beliefs and come up with many explanations of this word. Some say tanin means dinosaurs. Some say it means whales. Some say it means crocodiles, alligators, serpents. Many explanations. All of them are wrong. Because when you know Kabbalah, you know what this means. When you know the mysteries, the answer is obvious. To understand it, we'll look at another occurrence of this word. Later on in the Bible, in the book Exodus, written by Moses, in the 4th chapter, it says, God tells Moses, "What do you have in your hand?" And Moses says, "A rod, a staff," which is the vav, the spinal column. And God says, "Cast it on the ground." And Moses did it. And the Bible says, and it became a nahash, a serpent. And he fled from it. Right? So we here see nahash, serpent. Now God's giving Moses this instruction because he has to go confront the Pharaoh, which represents our ego. And Moses is saying, I can't do it. What am I going to do? I'm just a man. What am I going to do for the Pharaoh? And this is why God says, if you take your rod, it will become a serpent. We know, of course, that this represents the Kundalini and that power of the Shekinah, the Divine Mother, which rises in the spinal column and gives the inspiration and power to the prophet. Nonetheless, when Moses and his brother go to the Pharaoh in the 7th chapter, and he throws the rod, it does not become a nahash. It says in Hebrew, when Pharaoh shall speak unto you, saying, show a miracle for you, then thou shalt say unto Aaron, take thy rod and cast it before Pharaoh, and it shall become a tanin. Not nahash. It doesn't say serpent, it says tanin. This is one of the places where people have made this assumption that nahash and tanin are the same thing. And so they think tanin must be a serpent. Because a couple chapters before, he said the rod would become a serpent, nahash. So maybe tanin is another kind of serpent. It is. It is another kind of serpent, but very different. Totally different. Why? Because of the tav. And because of the two nuns that embrace the yod, that contain the yod. The tanin is something else. So to further understand this, we have to look at one more symbol. Earlier in the book of Exodus, we learn about the birth of Moses. And it says, and there went a man of the house of Levi, or Levi, and he took to wife a daughter of Levi, and the woman conceived and bare a son. And when she saw him, that he was a good child, Tob, from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, Tob Vera, the child was good, meaning born from chastity. She hid him 3 months. And then 3 months later, she put him in an ark, a boat, and floated him down the river. This is Moses, right? A child of Levi, from the tribe of Levi, right? Nonetheless, few realize that Moses has another name. Levi Tanon.
Remember I was just explaining to you the Tanan? That whale or great serpent. But if you put Levi in front of that, you spell Leviathan. Levi Tanan. This is Moses. In fact, the Zohar says it. The Leviathan is Moshe. Moses. And this is why in the Kabbalah, Moses is called the great fish. Very mysterious. In the Hebrew spelling of Leviathan, the first nun and the yod are hidden. And you'll notice this in other Hebrew words, that the nun can disappear. It won't be written. It's hidden. As in this case. This is Levitanan. Lamed, Vav, Yod, Tav, and final nun. Leviathan. Levi-Tanan. The tribe of Levi plus that great mysterious serpent in the waters. Now, if you've studied Christianity or Judaism, you always hear that the Leviathan is bad. You always hear that the Leviathan is wrong, is bad, is evil. But it doesn't say that in the Bible. In fact, it's one of the first creatures that God places into the mem, the water, the tanin, or tanon. It is this great power of the nun, which is in the mem. It is the sexual power. In the book of Job, Job passes through terrible ordeals. And this long sequence of suffering that he passes through concludes with an entire chapter describing the Leviathan, where God is saying, I am the one who put the Leviathan in the water. Who can stand against him? Can you? Can you conquer him? That force that I put in the water? And there's a whole chapter describing his immense power. And Job is completely humbled and bows before God. And that ends his ordeal. Now, why is that? Why should all of the suffering of Job, having his family taken from him, his wealth, his health, everything, conclude with a description of Leviathan? Because this represents the conclusion of the ordeals of Job. How the initiate enters into the trial of the Leviathan, which is resurrection. Death and resurrection. This is what's represented in Job. This is what's represented in Jonah. Remember Jonah, which is with nun in the middle of his name, is swallowed by the great fish. And it said that that great fish dies with Jonah in its belly for 3 days. Just like the 3 months that Moses was waiting to be put into the water. Just like the 3 days that Yeshua was in the tomb. Jonah was in the belly of the whale, the tanin. It doesn't say Leviathan in the book of Jonah. It says tanin. Because he had not yet become Leviathanon. He only becomes that upon exiting the great fish. You see, the word Leviathanon represents a resurrected master. Someone who has died and has been born again. This is the power of Nun. This is why Yeshua is the son of Nun. The word Yehoshua, which we say is Joshua, means salvation. He's the son of Nun. Yehoshua comes from the power of Nun, the fish. This is why we see that the great master Yeshua, Jesus, was able to walk upon the water, was able to transform the water into wine, was able to calm the storms in the water, was able to take the water and heal and cure. He had power over the Mem because he is a son of Nun. Redemption comes from that well, which he spoke of to the Samaritan woman and said, I will teach you how to draw from this well salvation, eternal life, and you will never thirst again. And the woman says, how can I draw that water from the well? And Jesus says, get your husband. There's the answer. This is why the first Nun is undeveloped. The first Nun is incomplete. The first Nun represents Nukva, which is a Hebrew term. It's one of the Parsufim, the faces of God. The Nukva relates specifically to our body. On the tree of life, to Malkut and Yasod. The Nukva is the bride-to-be who longs to unite with Zeranpin, our being, our innermost. Our innermost needs to incarnate here in our body. But our innermost cannot do that while we are impure, while we are degenerated. In order for our innermost to fully incarnate in our body, we have to die. Psychologically, spiritually, egotistically, and physically. We have to resurrect. Spiritually, initiatically, and physically. We have to be born again. In order for Zeranpin, the being, to incarnate in Nukva. And when that happens, we have final Nun. This final Nun represents that. The union, the perfection. That's why it is in Tanin. The word Tanin contains both Nuns. And nestled between them, protected and safe, is the Yod. You and me, the soul, the man, held in the bosom of Nun and sealed with a Tav, stamped, finished, complete. Of course, this is the goal. When we uncover the mystery of this letter Nun, we begin. We're not finished. The completion of the work doesn't happen until we reach Tav, the end of the alphabet. But now we know the mystery of Nun, we begin. That mystery is only possible on the direct path. It is the only way. A mere saint cannot accomplish it. A saint is a saint. But a saint is not a prophet. A saint is not a Moses, or a Jesus, or a Joshua. These are different paths. Gnosis is the path of the Bodhisattva. It's the direct path. The path that goes straight to the Absolute. That does not hesitate. And because of this, it is a path of radical transformation. It is a path that the saints look at with horror. Yes, the saints are terrified by the Leviathan, by the Leviathanon. This is why all the religious people talk about the Leviathan with fear. They are afraid of confronting their own beast in the waters. Because until we conquer that serpent in the waters, we are impure. We are nun, degenerated. And that is the case of all of us. In all of us, we have within a great beast. In the Bible, it's represented as having two fundamental sides. The first one is called Behemoth. This is in chapter 40 of the book of Job, where Behemoth is described as being a terrible beast full of incredible power. Yet God put him there. Why? He is the power of the Nefesh. He is the power in our blood, the power of life. To be alive is to have Behemoth. But you'll notice when you study that the Behemoth goes to the water and sinks into the water. And now we're talking about Leviathanon. That beast Behemoth in the waters is Leviathanon. And he's very powerful. He's the force of life itself. He is that force that drives every creature to procreate. How incredible is that power? It is sustaining this planet. It sustains every world. It is what drives a race to stay alive. Can your intellect compete with that? Never. Can your beliefs conquer that? Never. How many religions and beliefs have we seen fall to dust, and yet life continues? There is no power in belief. There's no power in theory. There is power in sex, in the use of that energy. Unfortunately, we use it the wrong way. If we learn to follow the guidance of our innermost and follow the mysteries of the path, we can harness that power and utilize it. This is why in the Psalms, David wrote, "For Elohim is my Melech, my king of old, working Yeshua in the midst of the earth." King David is praising his king, who is Elohim. And Elohim works salvation, Yehoshua, in the earth, which is the body, the Nukva. And David continues, "Thou, Elohim, didst divide the sea by thy strength. Thou breakest the heads of the Tanin in the Mayim." See, if you didn't know these Hebrew words, you wouldn't know what this means. But now you know what Mayim means. It's the sea, the lower Eden, Yesod. And now you know Tanin is that beast in the waters that can become the great whale, the resurrected master. But for that to happen, he has to be harnessed. He has to be broken and tamed by God. So David says, "Thou breakest the heads of Leviathan in pieces, and gavest him to be meat to the people in the wilderness." Very beautiful, but very cryptic. That the Leviathan becomes manna by the intercession of Elohim. Our inner Elohim, if we do the work, has the power through Mem, through Minerva, Maia, Mary, the mother, Amma. That power of the divine goddess to split the sea, our own Mayim, to crush the head of the Tanin, to break the Leviathanon, to tame them, to retrieve the power that they have and harness it. This is how the Elohim works Yeshua in the midst of the earth. And David says, "Thou didst cleave the fountain and the flood," both with Nun, both come from Mem. "Thou didst dried up the mighty rivers, which create hell," those rivers that flow out of Eden and become the 4 rivers of hell. "The day is thine, the night also. Thou hast prepared the Aur and the Shemesh, the light and the sun." This very cryptic, short passage is a teaching of the direct path. It corresponds exactly to the Bodhisattva path, which is the teaching of Samael Aun Weor. This has nothing to do with the teachings of saints and prophets. Nothing. This work can only be done by someone who has become Moses. Moshe. Moses represents Tiferet, the human soul. Moses is called the great fish, the Leviathanon, because he took the direct path. He conquered that great fish. How? He divided the Red Sea. He divided the waters from the waters, the superior from the inferior, just like in Genesis. He led his people with his staff that became Nahash and then became Tanin. And he became Levi Tanon, the great whale of the tribe of Levi. And the Egyptians were conquered, the ego, in other words. And when he finished his great mission, symbolically, he transferred his power. He gave up his power. Did you know that? Did you know that Moses renounced his power? That's what a bodhisattva does. A bodhisattva does not attach himself to having followers, to having groups, to being a leader, to being a king. Nothing. A bodhisattva cleaves only to God and follows only God and will sacrifice every atom of themselves in accordance with those commands. This is why in Deuteronomy, Moses, by command of his inner Elohim, transferred control of the nation of Israel. He gave it up. Most people don't realize that, but it's there. Who did he give it to? Yehoshua. Salvation. Christ. It says, "And Yehoshua, the son of Nun, was full of the spirit of Chokmah," Christ. "For Moshe had laid his hands upon him, And the children of Israel hearkened unto him and did as Jod-He-Vav-He commanded Moses. So Moses, by command of God, gave everything to Yahushua, to Christ. This is what every resurrected master does. This is what every bodhisattva does when they enter the bodhisattva path. This path is very defined, very specific, very difficult, and few enter into it. It is related with Tiferet. In the early stages of the path, we create the bodies of the soul. The Merkabah, the chariot of Ezekiel, represented by the holy creatures. When that work is complete, the initiate faces a choice to continue on the easy way, the spiral way, and to be a holy one, to be followed, to be admired, to have powers, to guide people like a shepherd, but to take ages and ages to advance. The alternate path is the path of the bodhisattva, the direct path. This is a path of bitterness and pain. It is a road to Calvary. It is the road that Christ represented when he carried his cross up the hill to be crucified. That is the direct path. In that path, one pays the entirety of one's debts now. All of the karma one has accrued over countless lifetimes is paid now. That is a path of pain. It is a path of suffering. It is a path within which the person is spit upon, ridiculed, rejected, abhorred, especially by the saints, just as Jesus was. Rejected by the authorities of the temple, the physical temple. The same happened in the life of Samael Aun Weor, especially towards the end of his work, when everybody renounced him, because no one can understand a walker of the straight path. Only another person doing the same work can understand them. No one else can. Especially the saints. The walkers of the spiral path take a wide, easy road. The walker of the straight path takes a narrow, very difficult, very steep path. The results are completely different. The walker of the spiral path may ascend gradually over ages and ages and ages of time. And yet they are always in danger of falling. This is why the letter Nun is the first letter of the word for to fall in Hebrew. Nun poses a great danger. As I told you, the word means to degenerate. It is the first letter of the word to fall. It is dangerous. Nonetheless, the one who remains true to his Elohim, who cleaves only to God, can advance to this level of Tiferet, within which the nefesh becomes nefesh haya. The person who reaches this degree has become a living soul. A nefesh that has life. In other words, they become what we might call an angel or a Buddha. This is someone who can speak with God. It is at that stage that they make the choice to take the spiral, the easy way, or to take the straight path, the difficult way. It is exceedingly rare for anyone to take the straight path. Both are good. Both help one advance towards the light. It is a difference of speed, and it is also a difference of attainment. Because the one on the spiral path can never receive another initiation. That's it. Once they've gotten the 5th degree, they're done. They just gradually work on purifying the ego. The one who works the straight path, on the other hand, enters into the serpents of light and receives other initiations until reaching the initiation of Bina. Bina has a nun in the middle. This initiation is the initiation of related with Job and Levi Tanon. To explain it in a little bit different way, we can look at a word that we all repeat and repeat and repeat, but scarcely know what it means. And this is Amen. Amen. It says in the Zohar that the one who says this word consciously receives more than the one who gave the blessing. Because in church or in a temple, the priest or the Kohen gives a blessing, and then the whole congregation says, Amen. If you say that word with great attentiveness, you get more than the priest. Because this word has incredible power. It in itself encodes the straight path. The direct path to God. If you meditate upon it. In this word, Amen, we have 3 letters. Aleph, Mem, and Nun. Aleph is the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet. It represents the wind, the breath of God. It represents that upper triangle, Keter, Hokmah, Binah, the Trinity. We explained to you before that Trinity is the 3 Amens. Each sphere is an Amen, and each sphere is also a letter. Aleph, Mem, Nun. Nonetheless, all 3 together are Aleph. You see in Aleph the 3 forces. 3 yods, and the one in the middle is extended. They are also 3 vavs. This is the thing about studying Kabbalah. You have to have a very open, intuitive mind. Not to fix a definition as being one thing only. Because nothing is one thing only. You are not one thing only. You are a daughter and a mother. A son and a father. Same as with all the letters. It is all relative. So this upper triangle is Aleph. But that upper triangle to create for the light of Hokmah, the light of Shekinah, to emerge, the 3rd Sephirah, Binah, with the Nun in the middle, divides itself into Jahava, right? Isis, Osiris. When that division occurs, we have Da'at. The world of Bria begins. The light emerges. But how does that light of the Shekinah, the light of Hokmah, emerge? Through Mem. The waters. Right? The upper Mem, which is Da'at. This is Mem in Amen. So if you look at Amen, Aleph, Mem, Nun, as a vertical column, and you put Aleph at the top, that is the supernal light, the Aleph. For that light to descend, we have to go to Bria, the second world, which is Mem, the first Mem. the upper Eden. That light goes through a process of gestation, just as a child in a womb, for 9 months. And when that light emerges, we have the lower worlds, right? It comes through the lower Mem, Yesod, the lower Eden. What does it emerge as? Nun. Amen. Aleph, Mem, Nun. That Nun is Horus, Christ, Yehoshua, the Savior, the light. But you see, that Nun is a complete Nun. Because you remember I mentioned the final Nun represents the union between the innermost and the body. It is a self-realized soul. This final Nun of Amen represents a resurrected master, like Christ or Buddha or Jesus. Someone who's very high, a walker of the direct path, not the spiral path. Not just a saint, not just a holy person. A highly realized Buddha, a completed soul of Vajra Sattva, maybe a Paramartha Satya, maybe Ein Sof Parinishpana, the highest type of soul. That is this Nun, the final Nun. This is how Yehoshua is a son of Nun. Son of Nun. We need to become that. A son of Nun. A child of God. The other meaning of this letter Nun, the final form, it represents a union. And you see in the word union, 2 N's. This union in the final Nun is between a male and female. When that light first comes out of the upper worlds, it is always androgynous, male, female. This is how God creates, as a reflection of the Elohim, male, female. It is only later that that light is divided into sexes. For that light to return, it has to be unified once again. In order to return back to God, we have to be male, female. It sounds strange, but that is what a resurrected master is. An androgynous being. They may have a male body or a physical body. Physically. A male or female physical body. That's irrelevant. What we're talking about being androgynous is the soul, the spirit, the nefesh. When that perfect union is acquired, when the final Nun is established in our consciousness, it represents that Zeir Anpin has married Nukva, has become a perfect soul, a perfect reflection of Elohim, God and Goddess, male, female, androgynous, perfect, complete. That is a final Nun. When we say Amen, we invoke that within us. We aspire to that. It is to become perfectly balanced, like God. To become complete. The danger is there for us to misunderstand to make a mistake. Because we have a mind. In Hebrew, we call it netzah. It starts with nun. This mind reasons. It compares. It analyzes. It listens to logic. It does not listen to intuition. The greatest danger that we face, even after becoming a master, even after ending the spiral path or the straight path, the greatest danger we ever face is from our own mind, not from outside. Because our own mind is stubborn. It is a donkey. And unless we tame it, it will take us on the wrong path. Believing things or saying things or thinking things that are not true. To get around that, we have to appeal to a higher force. Instead of relying on the knowledge in netzah, in our mind, in our intellect, in our thought, we need to rely on bina, intelligence, real intelligence, which is the Holy Spirit. It is abstract. It is intuitive. It is not concrete. It does not have reasons. It just knows. Any of us can access that because we have nefesh. We have neshama. We have ruach. These parts of the soul. When we open ourselves to receiving the guidance of God, it is to listen beyond our mind, but to hear a voice that comes from the silence, the voice of our innermost, the voice of our Divine Mother. To become Moshe is to be put into the hands of the waters, to rest upon those waters and to trust them. Those waters are inside. They are the Divine Mother Kundalini. Those waters can save us because the Nun emerges from them. The N comes from the M. In the middle of the word Bina is the Nun. This is very significant. Why? What is the first letter of Bina? Bet. What does Bet Nun spell? Son. Ben. Yeshua ben Pandir. Yeshua, son of Pandir. Ben means son. Bain is another way of pronouncing it. Baina. Bina is this sphere above, where all the creative power of God creates that womb of the Prakriti, the upper Mem, the upper Eden, and from that comes that Nun, the light. This is the Nun we have to rely on. But to know that Nun, you have to control your inner Leviathan, your beast. Do you have any questions?
So
Ben-Yamin. Yeah. Any appearance of Ben-Hur, son of the light. Ben-Aur. Yeah, Ben means son. Bat is daughter. Bat. Bat. Or B-E-T. Yeah. Any other questions?
Can you elaborate further on why Moses, when he's throwing the serpent down, the staff down in the desert, he gets Nahash, and then when he goes in front of the Pharaoh, he gets a tummy?
These stories are symbolic, the stories of Moses. When we first begin working with the rod, which is our own vav, the spine, we are harnessing the power in the waters and raising it up the spine. And this is what it means in the book of Numbers. When the Israelites are being bitten by the Nahash Saraf, fiery serpents, and they appeal to Moses and say, please save us. We're being persecuted by these fiery serpents. So God tells Moses, put a serpent upon a pole, and any who look upon it will be healed. The Nahash Saraf is the serpent who is fallen. It is the serpentine power in the earth that bites us. It is lust, fornication, adultery, pride, envy, jealousy. It is that power in our blood, in our sexual energy, that inverts and harms us as a soul. That's why it's fiery serpent. Moses represents Tiferet, our human soul, who can receive the guidance of God. And God tells our soul, raise a serpent on a pole. That pole is the spine. That serpent is a brazen serpent, which incidentally, the word nun in ancient Canaanite language means brass. So that serpent rises up the spine. That is the kundalini in Sanskrit. It is Nahash. Right? The first serpent that's raised is Nahash. It's only after someone goes beyond that to enter the direct path that Nahash can become Tanin. Now this is also a place to be aware that Tanin is also duality. We all have Tanin within. It is the very root sexual power in our blood, in our sexual energy. We all have that. It's put there by God. God created the Tanin. We need it, but we have to control it. And we have to make that Tanin Leviathanon, Leviathan, but the upright one, resurrected. Does that make sense now? So these are stages or degrees.
How do we understand the relationship between Nun and the dark night of which wrote St. John on the cross? And what Job's affair with violent currents of suffering that run deep beneath the waters of his faith? Is the dark night of Job's soul illustrative or the straight path?
The dark night of the soul, in relation with Job, and in relation with any initiate, relates to a specific ordeal that occurs in many octaves and stages in the great work. It is also called a spiritual night. This is a natural process in life. Just as if we have day and night physically, we have day and night spiritually. And when one walks on the path, you pass through periods of day and night. Yet, there are marked phases. Some of them are long and very painful. In the Arcanum 9, we see a hermit walking through the darkness of a spiritual night. And this is a time within which we don't see God. We once did, but now we don't. This relates to an initiate, someone who meditates, who can receive guidance, but then enters a phase where they receive nothing. They feel alone. Even Jesus on the cross cried out, "Father, why hast thou forsaken me?" This is a spiritual night. This is a moment in which all the parts of the being are withdrawn, and what's left is the human soul, alone. It's an uncomfortable feeling, and everybody feels afraid of it. But let me point out to you that everyone here is in a spiritual night right now, because none of us feel God and see God right now. You are in a spiritual night. If you cannot perceive God, I mean see God, not just imagine God, but see God, hear God, the same way you hear my voice or you see anything else. If you cannot do that, you are in a spiritual night. Yet, when you enter the path, spiritual night becomes more painful. You think you're in pain now? You haven't tasted anything yet. You want to understand that pain? Study the Gospels. Study the life of Jesus. Study the life of any great master and look at what they passed through in order to acquire what they acquired. It is painful. And a spiritual night is part of that. Another question.
Was there then the Leviathan, the one that took the Israelites from Egypt into the promised land?
The question is, did the Leviathan take the Israelites from Egypt? In a synthetic way, you could say, in a sense, yes. But in the absolute way, no. The one who led the Israelites out of Egypt was Judeo-Christian. Through the pillar of fire, through the column of smoke, the Elohim, Yehovah, provided guidance to the human soul, Moses, who in turn led the people, which represents the consciousness, out of slavery. This is a long process. And only once the causes of slavery are removed, in other words, the ego, can that human soul die. Can he give up his power and give it to Yahushua, the Savior, and say, "You, Lord, are in charge, not me." And when he does that, then that human soul can die. Did you notice that Moses doesn't die in the Bible? Where did he go? He just sort of stops being talked about, right? It's very mysterious. He died and resurrected, but it's hidden. It's hidden deep in the symbolism of the Bible. That death and resurrection is where that once formerly deeply buried and out of control creature in the waters, the Leviathan, then becomes a creature of God. And this is why in the 5th day of Genesis, it says, "And God created the great whales, the Tanin." This is related with that 5th day. The 5th day is related with the human soul, Tiferet. The 6th day is the completion of that process. To become a man of the 6th day is to fulfill initiation. And so between the 5th and the 6th, the Leviathan becomes Leviathanon, a resurrected master. Another question?
Is the Exodus equal as the direct path?
Is the Exodus equal to the direct path? The direct path, in its synthesis, is the work wherein the initiate enters into the wilderness, which is our mind, in order to completely eliminate all notion of self. The process of the Exodus is the same. The pure parts of the soul, Israel, are taken out of Matzarim, suffering. This is not a literal story in Exodus. People think that the race or people of the Jews were taken out of slavery in Egypt. And yet they were never in slavery in Egypt. It is a symbol. All of us are slaves in Matzarim, the place between the waters. Matzarim has two mems, remember? We are in slavery in our psyche. Our own Moshe, the human soul, Tiferet, through rigorous work, can purify our mind by utilizing the power in the rod, that Nahash, the serpent, and cleanse us. That is the work of the direct path. You see, the people on the spiral path are only interested in becoming saints and then being worshipped and followed. The people on the direct path want to die. This is the difference. And you can easily see a different flavor in the teachings of Samael Aun Weor, for example, or the teachings of Shantideva, or Buddha Shakyamuni, or especially Padmasambhava and Milarepa. These teachings are very direct, very potent, and many people are terrified of them because they call for death, the death of the I. That is the work of the direct path. That is the exodus, to exit from suffering. To exit from suffering, you cannot do it halfway. You cannot do it slowly. It's like getting a surgery. If you do it slowly, it hurts more, and there's risk of dying as a soul. If you do it quickly and accurately, it hurts, but then you're done. Another question?
I have two questions. First one, the noon is the fish inside men in the water. So would that be the same as when they say the ens seminis, the entity of the semen?
That's exactly right. The nun is the ens virtutis, which is the fire, the virility, the virtue, which is hidden inside the ens seminis, which is the semen, the sexual water. So the nun is the mercury. If you've studied alchemy, you know that mercury has many phases. Nun is that. That's why there's different characters to represent nun, because it has different levels.
So like mercury is going from, I guess, the brute mercury to the other mercury.
Right. And we have to, that's the whole process of the work, is to extract the pure soul or the pure spirit of the mercury, which is nun. That's how we become a son of nun. And this is why the alchemist said, thank God for mercury, because without it, there would be no work. That mercury is nun, which is the sexual fire in the mem. Very good. Another question?
Second one was, what about the Tanin in the Pinocchio story?
Yep. The story of Pinocchio has a lot of initiatic symbolism. And so that whale represents the same. The initiate has to be swallowed by the whale, right? Just like Yonah. To be swallowed by the whale is to go into your own waters to cleanse it. And the end of that process is when the whale dies, right? That death is how the resurrected master emerges. Resurrection comes through death. And the story of Yonah is the same. The whale has to die. The question?
Yes, you said that when one takes the straight and narrow path, that we have to pure off our karma now, and we have to go through the pain, bitter the pain.
Right.
If we leave that path, but however return to it, will that karma and that pain be heavier than when we were on it the first time?
Well, let's look at it this way. When you say when you leave the path, that is open for interpretation, what exactly that means. To leave the path truthfully is to fall from the path, which is the 16th arcanum, which we're going to talk about later. It's related with the nun, right? As I explained, the nun is the first character of the word for to fall. And that happens because one expels the nun. That's how you fall. To fall from the path is related with the next 3 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. So we're going to be talking about this, right? What exactly that means. Nonetheless, the path is steep, right? It's like a big hill. You remember the story of Sisyphus from the Greeks? Sisyphus received his punishment, which was that he had to roll a giant stone up a hill. It's very difficult. A huge struggle each step to move that stone. But then he would lose control of it. And the stone would roll all the way back down, and he'd have to go all the way back down to get it. I don't know about you. The first time would be hard. But the second time, I'd be tired. And I'd have used my energy. And I go back and do it again, it's going to be harder. That's how it's harder. You become more and more burdened. It becomes harder. But karmically, it's even more complicated than that. Because it depends on the heights to which you reached in your previous effort. To reach any particular height, you always have to get help. And when you betray that help, you owe. More than that, you might not get it again. Right? Like if we're friends and you betray me, and then you come back for a loan, or you want my help again, I might not help you. Or if I do, I'm going to be real careful how I help you. You know what I'm saying? Same thing with the karmic law. Now this is a very important factor that you've brought up. Because the nun represents the force of Christ, which descends through the Amen and gives us the ability to reach God, to return to God, right? The nun is that. It is that power. That is a Christic power related especially with the direct path. When someone incarnates that force becomes alive in them. That's how a Nefesh Haya exists. The nun is there alive, Christ. And Samael Aun Weor explained that when Christ comes to inhabit your soul, he comes and mixes with you. He feels what you feel. He suffers with you. He does not take your suffering away. He does not take away your karma. He does not take away your pain. He suffers it with you. This is distinctly different from what many of the established religions say. They say, oh, if you believe in Christ or you accept our religion, all your sins go away. No more suffering. This is not true. It's not true. Jesus never said that. Right? Has to be very clear about that. When you have a debt, you must pay your debt. Some debts can be forgiven. But debts related with sexual energy, with nun, cannot. They have to be paid. This is the only way to create equilibrium in your soul. This is not a punishment from God. It is a function of nature. It is the way it must be. And when you comprehend the nun and you comprehend your karma, you will understand why, and you will accept it happily. You will seek for it. To seek to die. You will long for it. Because you will comprehend that when you take your karma and you gladly pay it, you clear your debts. And you come through that clean, renewed, reborn. Whereas if someone just forgives you of the debt, there's still a shadow there. This is why the chapter 41 of Job, God talks so much about Leviathan and says, who can compete with him? Who can kill him? Who can conquer him? And Samael Aun Weor says about this in the Pistis Sophia. Who can kill one who has already died? Who can make to suffer one who has already suffered everything? No one. A resurrected master is that. They have already suffered everything. They have already been dead. They have died. How can you make them suffer? How can you conquer them? You cannot. This is why these masters are so great. Jesus, Buddha, Krishna, even Samael. They have faced and suffered everything. They're like steel. Beautiful. We have to become that. Another question?
I was still wondering about the relationship between moon and night.
That's a good question. The relationship between noon and night. In that same verse in the Bible, 21 in the first book of Genesis, it says, and God created the great whales, right? I explained it doesn't say whale, it says tanin. But that verse also says, let me read it to you. And God created great tanin and every nefesh haya that creeps, which the mayim brought forth abundantly. So when we read this, on the surface, it seems like God just created a lot of animals. But in fact, this phrase is a Kabbalistic mystery. Because it says, in Kabbalistic terms, and God created the great tanin, that beast in the waters, and nefesh haya, that move or that creep about. Right? But what that means in the Zohar, it says that that is a reference to Lilith. Lilith. The goddess, but inverted. The word Lilith comes from Lila, which means night. So that tanin, that creature in the waters, has a relationship with Lila, Lilith, the night. And this is why in the psalm that I read you, David says, the day is thine, the night is also thine. Right? The day is Yam, the night is Lila. And thou hast prepared the Or, the light, and the Shemesh, the sun. The relationship is that the Nun is the path to day or night. Through the Nun, that fish in the waters, comes forth light. But how is that light polarized? By our will, by our action. Shemshan, or Samson, means one who carries the light of the sun. But he fell victim to Delilah, the one from the night. How did he do this? He was a Nazarene. Did you know that? From Nazar, which is Nun. And he fell victim through lust. And he expelled his Nun, and Lila conquered him. And what happened then? He went blind. The light was taken from him. He entered the night. That's all from Nun. You had a question here?
Oh, yeah. I think it was in Kabbalah. Samael Aun Weor talked about how resurrected masters are governed by the law of the Leviathan.
That's right.
I was wondering, since we've talked so much about the Leviathan today, perhaps this would be a good time to perhaps elaborate what that is.
Yes, in the book about Tarot and Kabbalah, the Master Samael explains, firstly, that the resurrected masters are Leviathanon, and that they are subject to the law of Leviathanon. This simply refers to an aspect of katansya, or superior karma, the superior law, but specifically in relation with Christ. A resurrected master has become an embodiment of the light of Chokmah, This is why in Deuteronomy it's explained that Yeshua was filled with the Ruach of Chokmah, the Spirit of Christ. In other words, Yahushua is a resurrected master. And to have that means one answers to the law of the Leviathanon. That is the law of Christ. One law. That one law is love. Not love the way we think of it, but love as sacrifice. This sounds simple, right, to us. Oh, it's just love. No. If it were simple, we'd all be there. If love were simple, this planet would be a paradise. It is not simple. It is simple in the sense that it is one law. It is united. It is without conflict. It is pure. But to our mind, it makes no sense, because our mind is ruled by desire. And that law is completely free of desire. I should explain to you that when I discuss a resurrected master, we're talking about someone in whom there is not an atom of desire, not an atom of ego, not even a shadow of pride or lust. This is a being who is absolutely perfect from our point of view. So to be under the law of the Leviathan is to be that. It is to be a great dragon, in other words. The word Leviathan is often replaced by the word dragon. And interestingly, the dragon is also this dualistic symbol, because you have dragons of darkness and dragons of light. A dragon is simply a being who commands all of the elements. You see, the mythological figure or character of a dragon can fly, can swim in water, can cross the earth, can breathe fire, commands all the elements, right? And it's very powerful. That is a master. A dragon is a master. But one can be a master of the black path or the white path. And being a master of the white path, one can be a master of the spiral or the straight path. Yet, someone on the spiral path is never a dragon. They can be a master, but a dragon is resurrected. A dragon has died and been born again completely. It's worth pointing out to you that in many of his books, the Master Samael warned his disciples about what in Spanish was called the Dagdukpa, and which is a way that Blavatsky was interpreting a Tibetan word. The actual word is Drukpa, with an R in it, D-R-U-K, or D-R-U-G, Drugpa. And this word comes from Druk, which is the name of Bhutan in Tibetan. So a Drukpa is simply somebody from Bhutan, right? On the physical level, the literal level. But what Samael Aun Weor is addressing are initiates who follow the path of black magic or black tantra. When he's talking about the Drukpa, he's talking about them, not just anybody from Bhutan. There are a lot of people from Bhutan who are perfectly normal people, like the rest of us who are perfectly abnormal. A Drugpa, in the terms of initiation, is any black master. It is a term that refers to a black magician, not just someone from Bhutan or someone who practices Buddhism. So we need to be clear about that. Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
presentation of this lecture was made possible by donations from listeners like you. Help Gnostic Radio to help others. Make a donation by visiting gnosticradio.org. For questions and deeper understanding of this lecture, we invite you to explore the wide variety of resources available on our websites. Thank you for your support. May all beings be happy.